This is Bart Peterson, and you are listening to the FCPA Compliance Report on the Compliance Podcast Network.
This is Greg Gilchrist, and you are listening to the FCPA Compliance Report on the Compliance Podcast Network.
This is Dan DeMarco, and you are listening to the FCPA Compliance Report on the Compliance Podcast Network.
In this podcast, I began a multi-part exploration of the Wirecard accounting scandal with Mikhail Reider-Gordon, Managing Director of Affiliated Monitors. We introduce the topic. Mikhail goes through some of the many scandals the company has been involved with over the years. We highlight the failure of the regulators in Germany in this case, and foreshadow some of the upcoming topics we'll explore on future podcasts.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode. And today I'm thrilled to have back with me Mikhail Reider-Gordon, and she is the Managing Director of Institutional Ethics and Integrity at Affiliated Monitors. Mikhail,
Tom,
first of all.
Stop.
Yep.
You got my name. You mispronounced it.
Okay. What's the right?
Mikhail.
Mikhail.
Yeah,
right.
Reider-Gordon. Sorry.
Okay.
Go ahead.
This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back again for another episode. And today I have with me Mikhail Reider-Gordon. She is the Managing Director for Institutional Ethics and Integrity at Affiliated Monitors. Mikhail, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me today.
It's absolutely my pleasure. I'm glad to be back.
And we are going to take up the juicily delicious Wirecard fraud, which, as you can tell by my butchered pronunciation, I am extraordinarily excited to visit with you about. So can we start off by, it seems many people, including regulators, were confused about what is or perhaps what was Wirecard. Could we even start with that?
Absolutely. This is my favorite soap opera at the moment. Okay. So Wirecard's a German fintech company, and they are or were two things. In Europe, they were what is known as an acquiring business, and they functioned as a conduit between a consumer and a merchant on e-commerce, right? I want to buy something online. They're the in-between that takes my credit card details. They process the payment. Off it goes to the merchant. Outside of Europe, they acted as a payment processor, mobile payments, e-commerce, and through various acquisitions, they also owned and functioned as a German-registered bank, Wirecard Bank. And back at their, now fictional, Apogee, they collaborated with probably some 250,000 companies worldwide. I mean, major companies, KLM, Qatar Airways, London Transport, a lot of global brands where they were the middleman, taking a small cut of transactions between the customers and the merchants. They were licensed by Visa and MasterCards. They could issue credit cards as well as process payments on behalf of those merchants again. And that is, in a nutshell, what they are or were.
So I have lived in Houston this time for 36 years, and Enron is the single biggest experience around accounting fraud and business value crashing that I have lived through. And Wirecard is right up there. So I wanted to start off by asking, have you ever seen a faster dip in value from $12 billion to insolvency in 5 days?
I will say no, but I was less surprised, I think, by their precipitous fall now, and it is spectacular. 3 days of trading, 80% of the market value wiped out, incredible. But in Enron's defense, it took 6 months for them to get to insolvency. But if you look back on Wirecard's history, there have been some steep falls in their history, and it's almost invariably been driven by allegations of accounting irregularities. In 2010, shares fell almost 30%, just value wiped off in one day, when the company was named in a U.S. federal criminal case against an individual in Florida who was running an unlicensed MSB and using Wirecard as his bank. And just the mere appearance of Wirecard in that complaint wiped 30% off. Now they bounced back, in 2015, when Dan McCrum of the Financial Times first started to write about and question inconsistencies in the company's accounts, the share price of Wirecard dropped. In 2016, a group of hedge funds concerned about, this is going to sound like a broken record, Wirecard's accounting practices, they caused a 20% drop in the stock value. And if you look at the longer trend, the price overall, it slowly rose between 2011, steady incline, and then March of 2018, it starts to rocket. It hits this high by the fall of 2018. And then, the FT publishes that comprehensive investigative report. This is driven by a whistleblower. And in January 2019, and that causes the stock to dip again. And it recovers. And then McCrum follows up with a very damning report in October this past year, to October 2019. And again, it takes a dip. And then, of course, in 2020, the FT continues to publish its damning evidence, and the Singaporean authorities raid Wirecard operations in Singapore. And again, we see a fall, and then all of it comes to a head. And poof, nothing left.
So we both have lived through numerous financial scandals, and we've studied them as well. Are there any things about this scandal that you think are unique or make it unique?
I want to say yes and no. Certainly, the speed of its demise is perhaps unique. But if you look over the longer period, this was a much slower burn, I think, than many folks realize. Again, as I've mentioned, there were inklings. There were inklings in 2008 when a German shareholder association published an attack on Wirecard's balance sheet irregularities. That was a red flag, but it was in fact, one of the individuals involved in that ended up doing some prison time in conjunction with some acting stock tip. And throughout this, they've had these red flags that people just seemed intent on ignoring, which I think is not dissimilar to many other scandals we've seen in the past. There were long history of bizarre claims by their CEO, Marcus Braun. He would claim that they were using AI and cutting edge, as he called it, technology. And now we know that really employees were, cobbling together Excel spreadsheets. But on investor calls, an analyst noted that Braun's description sounded really rudimentary and like a high schooler. He quote, this is Braun talking about this cutting edge technology, quote, a data layer that also takes new and state-of-the-art instruments in the area of machine learning and AI into account. Like, huh? Right, to me, this is shades of Holmes and Theranos with these bizarre descriptions. You look back at the red flags and the irregularities called out, particularly 2015, 2016. At one point, there were questions by investors about how payments were being booked and revenue irregularities. And Wirecard's finance director told analysts on a call to, quote, focus on his version of cash flows every 3 months rather than the official long version following all of the international financial reporting standards necessities. Don't focus on those necessities. Focus on his version. Huge red flag. We've seen this before. And we've seen folks who ought to have known better ignore these same red flags.
So that took a different direction than my good friend Jeffrey Skilling, who on an analyst call back when he was the CEO or COO of Enron, just told the analysts they didn't understand the financial model. It's because they were too stupid. But let me pick up on your point on the red flags that were raised and who perhaps should have been looking more closely at those by asking you about the role of EY in this. EY has now said that they had a fraud perpetrated on them. And I guess the question I wanted to start with, I understand that auditors cannot always uncover fraud, but can a fraud be perpetrated on auditors if they're doing their job properly?
Okay. Well, yeah. I'm gonna say no. In a minimal defense of EY is that they were not forensic accounting auditors on this. But let's go back. Something I think a lot of folks don't know is that back when this attack by the Shareholder Association in 2008 on Wirecard questioning balance sheet irregularities, it was EY that was brought in as the special auditor. They were actually tasked with being the forensic auditor at that time. And then after that, when they gave them a clean bill of health, EY is brought in to replace what had been a local accounting firm out of Munich that was the standard auditor for Wirecard. So, I'll say the auditors, EY had full access to Wirecard's books and records. The FT, the Financial Times, I keep calling it the FT, the Financial Times did not. And yet the Financial Times managed to pull these accounts apart and figure out, hey, these are not adding up. These warrant additional scrutiny. There are a lot of questions here. And if you follow McCrum's analysis over the 5-year period, just from 2015 to early 2020, it's fairly obvious that there is something deeply, deeply wrong. KPMG that wasn't retained until 2019 managed to ask all the right questions that E&Y didn't. And one of the first things that's typically done in any audit is that third-party verification. Now, I know EY claims, oh, well, the banks didn't send us the documents, but we were given copies of the bank statements, so that's sufficient. It's like I don't know of any sound audit practice that doesn't go directly to the financial institution and say, we need copies of this. You're authorized to collect those. So it is mystifying that they should have missed this.
Let me pick up on another point you raised, which is the ubiquitous FT or the Financial Times, for those not in the know. I have, although I'm married to an English girl, I've never lived in England, but I find the FT to be, I think, now the world's top business newspaper. You have lived in the United Kingdom. You're partly educated in the United Kingdom. What are your thoughts on the Financial Times and what it means for the greater business community literally across the globe?
Well, I'd have to agree with your assessment. I think they have definitely risen to the top as the premier business publication, and I believe me, I'm so grateful that McCrum and his colleagues are so tenacious and exacting. I would wish to see more of this from other media outlets. We shouldn't have to rely on a single paper, and that's not to say that there isn't some great journalism and investigative reporting out of many other media outlets, but certainly they have demonstrated an exactitude and fortitude that is admirable, and I'd like to see some other papers follow suit. So.
One of the things that struck me as unique about this case, and frankly, as a lawyer, offended me to no end, was that the German regulators who oversaw Wirecard actually brought criminal charges against the FT and their reporters for breaking this story.
Oh, yeah, that was astounding.
Bill Barr notwithstanding in his antics, what is the role of a regulator in Germany? And perhaps have I misunderstood the German regulatory model?
Well, it's certainly one that would be unfamiliar to a U.S. audience. So the Wirecard was subject to multiple regulators. Interestingly, the bulk of Wirecard's business, and this is highly unusual, is actually regulated by a district government. It's the Upper Bavarian district government. So this is a local agency. We'd think of it in the U.S. as akin to a county or small state agency. I wouldn't even, it would not equate to, say, a California AG or a Texas AG's office. And it goes really without saying that they were woefully unprepared or even capable of regulating a global fintech company. And additionally, there's been so much media and German government focus on this. Germany's Federal Financial Supervisory Authority, known as BaFin, not BaFin, although they've certainly acted like BaFins in this. They're the regulator responsible for investigating insider dealing and market abuse, and they do actually have a legal right and obligation to notify the German Public Prosecutor's Office of any facts that give rise to suspicion that a criminal offense has been committed. Obviously, they didn't do that initially. As you said, when the FT published their big story that reported on whistleblower allegations, they actually accused the FT and its reporters, two of their reporters, of attempted price manipulation. But in addition to BaFin, there's also a private sector body, and BaFin can ask them, this is the Financial Reporting Enforcement Panel, or FREP, to investigate. And some have argued that FREP really was the first line of defense from the regulatory side and failed. So BaFin asked FREP to investigate back in early 2019, again, post FT January story. And remember, FT has been reporting on this for off and on for 5 years, but it's one of the big stories that is published, including copies of documents that are quite damning. BaFin asked FREP to investigate. Now, FREP is a private sector body that monitors financial reporting of listed companies on behalf of the German government. But wait for it, there are a total of 15 FREP employees in all of Germany. And in this case, for Wirecard, one FREP employee was tasked with the investigation in 2019. FREP only has a budget of €6 million a year. To put this in context, the KPMG special audit that launched later in 2019, that is said to have required 40 employees and cost upwards of €10 million. So here you have this one FREP employee beavering away at a very complex set of books for a global fintech company. So it's not really a surprise that they didn't get very far. Then you have the Singaporean authorities that raided the Wirecard Singapore office, again around allegations of accounting fraud, and they launched their investigation quite some months ago, and they certainly didn't ban. BaFin BaFin banned short sellers at one point. And they didn't coordinate with Singapore. They watched Singapore authorities raid the Wirecard office there for APAC and did absolutely nothing about it. And all of that really, that has led us to where we are now, where the EU is now investigating BaFin to determine if BaFin broke EU laws in its dealings with Wirecard. So the European Commission has actually asked the ESMA, which is the European Securities and Market Authority, to carry out a fact-finding analysis of BaFin specific to Wirecard. So, and the Commission's director even wrote in a letter to ESMA, quote, the preliminary analysis should seek to establish a comprehensive description and assessment of the events, including the adequacy of the supervisory response to these events leading to the collapse of Wirecard AG. Yikes.
So now there are some assets left of Wirecard. The firm is still in insolvency. There have been some discussions, or at least reports, that perhaps some of the assets could be purchased. But is there any place for Wirecard to go from here, in your opinion?
Well, I think there's a lot more to come on Wirecard. On the insolvency side, buyers are picking over what remains. For instance, Wirecard North America used to be Citigroup's prepaid card services unit, so that's likely going to be sold off. The UK FCA had initiated a temporary ban on Wirecard Solutions, which is the UK arm. They've now lifted that so the entity can continue to collect and process outstanding payments and then likely be sold off. Deutsche Bank is considering buying Wirecard Bank. Deutsche's CEO was quoted as saying they felt it was almost obligatory on Deutsche being Germany's largest bank to consider buying it. But I think we have a lot more to see. This story is only really starting to get going, so to speak. There's a lot of truth yet to come out. If we think about this, recall that one of the key actors in this saga, Jan Marsalek, the individual who was second in command to Braun and was COO of Wirecard, he had direct responsibility and oversight of the internal departments and divisions responsible for what are now confirmed fraudulent profits. He's a fugitive now. So we've got Marcel, and he's gone to extreme lengths. It's come out that a few weeks ago, in his flight from justice, he actually bribed Philippine immigration officers into recording that he had entered that country on June 23rd in a supposed route to China. It's now come to light that the immigration officers falsified the records at Marsalek's bidding, and he never actually entered the Philippines. Braun's been charged with multiple counts of false accounting and market manipulation, but he's still maintaining he didn't know anything about it. There's a third German-based Wirecard exec who was arrested and charged, Oliver Bellenhaus. He ran the Middle East unit out of his apartment in Dubai, and that was an apartment in the luxury Burj Khalifa Tower. He's been arrested. Christopher Bauer, a German former Wirecard APAC exec, and his wife are under investigation by the Philippine National Bureau of Investigation and its Anti-Money Laundering Council, AMLEC. AMLEC's also looking into 5 other Wirecard business partners in the Philippines. There's the Singapore investigation. They've already arrested 8 employees and partners in total, some of whom are being held in detention pending trial. So I think we can expect a lot more to come to light in the next weeks and months. We don't know if the UAE regulators are going to open an investigation. German police just re-raided Wirecard's headquarters for a second time just last week. Austrian police have raided several locations in Austria. There are now no less than 12 German prosecutors, 33 police investigators, and a multiplicity of IT and forensic accounting specialists who are working on the German case alone. When you also think about Wirecard APAC, which really in some ways launched or precipitated this investigation, this greater investigation, we have likely the Hong Kong Monetary Authority opening an investigation because it was at Marsalek's direction that Thorsten Holten and Stefan von Erfa, Wirecard's respectively head of Treasury and head of accounting, falsified invoices and set up a round-tripping scheme that ran for multiple years. Right? They cooked the books in order to get the Hong Kong regulators to grant them a license there. So now we can anticipate Hong Kong's monetary authority wading in. We got a long way to go. This soap opera is just getting going.
Unfortunately, we are near the end of our time, but I hope as more develops in this case that perhaps I could call upon you again for another visit.
I'd be delighted. We haven't even talked about the broken Deutschland AG, so let's talk.
All right. Till next time.
Thanks, Tom.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox again. I'd like to thank you for listening to this episode of the FCPA Compliance Report. I hope you'll join me again next week where I take a look at an issue related to the FCPA, compliance and ethics. We have two great new podcast series on the Compliance Podcast Network that I hope you're aware of. The first one is Compliance and Coronavirus, where I try to bring sanity and clarity to the compliance practitioner and the business executive around coronavirus. Also, the Compliance Life features one CCO a month talking about their journey to the CCO chair and beyond in 4 parts. This month, it's Ryan Robillé, who has a fascinating journey. Also, if you're a fan of Teddy Roosevelt, I have a series on 12 O'Clock High, a podcast on business leadership hosted by Richard Lummis, where we're looking at Teddy Roosevelt, his life, his presidency, and beyond, and what its messages are for the leaders of today. It's a fascinating series. I know you will enjoy it, and it's particularly important for compliance practitioners to take a look at leadership skills. I hope you'll join me again next week for our next episode of the FCPA Compliance Report. The FCPA Compliance Report is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network and a proud member of C-Suite Radio. Thanks again for listening.